Law and technology transform social justice. I think this panel is a great kickoff of our afternoon lunch keynote speaker, Dan Lear. His speech and conversation was very insightful on what we should expect and actually aspire to when we are talking about access to justice and using technology as one of the tools and mediums to make that happen. Here on our panel today, I would like to first introduce Mr. Robert Hutchinson from Measures for Justice, Ms. Nicole Bradrick from CEO of Theory and Principle, Mr. Quentin Stenhouse, a senior housing attorney from the Greater Baltimore Greater Boston, I'm sorry, Legal Services, I apologize. And finally, Ms. Jessica Frank from A to J Author. We're going to start by getting a quick introduction from each of our speakers, and then we'll go straight into questions. Mr. Hutchinson?
Hi, so good to see you today. So I'm from Measures for Justice. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit research institute. And what we're doing is creating a set of performance measures for criminal justice. What's interesting about that is, if you think about schools or hospitals, if you want to know where the good schools are, it's like really easy to do, right? Like you just go onto Great Schools or some school rating website, and there's all kinds of data you can look up about standardized test scores and all that. Same thing for hospitals. All this information is out there, but if you want to know how the criminal justice system is doing in your county, how would you do that? You can't do that, probably, because the data is not available, or if it's available, it's not presented to the public in an easily digestible way. So I'm so excited because I thought I was going to have to talk to you about what we do, but I actually get to show you, which is great. So here's an example. We started with 6 states here that we have so far. I'm going to show you Pennsylvania really quickly. So this is on our website. This is available to the public at measuresforjustice.org. If you go into our data portal, you can look at the different measures we have. We have 32 measures, and they're available, based on the data that's available in that area. So in Pennsylvania, we have 27. And if we go in here, we can look at all these different measures of the criminal justice system in Pennsylvania. So I can show you the first one here is about ROR rates, so when people are given non-monetary release after arrest. And in this instance, we're restricting it to nonviolent misdemeanor cases. So we're talking about cases that you might think would normally get ROR. And we also are excluding cases where they had prior violent convictions in recent years. So if we go in there, we see this heat map of Pennsylvania. And this shows you, no, I don't want to do a tour right now. I'm giving you a tour. This shows you a heat map of what those rates look like in Pennsylvania. And if I switch over to this bar graph view here, each bar represents a different county in Pennsylvania. So you can see the rate is 80% statewide, and then each county, if you hover over, will tell you the rate in that county. So you can see the performance there. And another interesting thing you can do is to filter the data by some case or defendant characteristics. Like, for example, if we wanted to look at race or ethnicity, we can do that. And then now the portal will break that apart for us. So this actually shows you that in the majority of counties in Pennsylvania, whites are more likely to get ROR in these cases than non-whites. So this is just an example of how you can use the data portal to look at this kind of information. And a lot of what we do actually touches on the other topics that have come up today, especially the hacker ethic from our last talk, because a lot of people said that the data is too hard to get, it's not standardized, all of these things are true, but with the sufficient willpower, it can be done.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicole Bradrick. I'm the CEO of Theory and Principle. We are a software development firm, design and development firm that's focused exclusively in the legal space. I come from just down the road in Portland, Maine. You guys might not know, but Portland, Maine is the hub of legal technology development, as we are the only legal tech product development firm in the universe. So we work on, I'm a former civil rights lawyer. I was a litigator in Portland, and this is actually my third company in the legal innovation, legal tech space. A lot of the work that we do involves justice-related technology. So we work with a lot of nonprofits and foundations that are interested in the ways we can use tech to expand access to information about the law, access to self-help tools, whatever it may be, ways to make the law more understandable and accessible. And I kind of agree with Dan's comment earlier about access is sort of a weird word. But we also work with law firms and do sort of things more on the corporate side too. We work with a lot of legal tech startups, and our goal is to make legal technology overall better designed, more usable, more prominent, and make sure that people can find their way to the right tools to help them. I think in a lot of analogous industries, people know where to go when they have a legal problem online. I am a hypochondriac and I'm on WebMD all the time. And I find it very enjoyable because I can make all these assumptions about these things that are happening to me, but it also prompts me to go and see a doctor and to advocate for myself in that space. We don't really have an analogy to that in the legal space. So we're sort of on a mission to change the online interface of the law so that people know where to go, know where to find the help they need, self-help when they need to, but then find their way to an attorney when that's appropriate too.
Hi, my name is Quentin Stainhouse. I'm an attorney at Greater Boston Legal Services. I've been there the last 9 years, and I actually wear 3 hats there. So I'm a practicing attorney, I'm a computer programmer, and I'm a systems administrator, which is a job role that I kind of created for myself over time. So I get to work both on the very personal individual level, doing direct client service. Right now I'm spending 1 day a week at a shelter where we have a contract to provide legal services on site. And I spend the other 4 days a week doing some work following up with those clients there, as well as developing legal technology for Greater Boston Legal Services and doing some more traditional IT work as well. To me, I think there's really no question that there's a really important place in solving the access to justice gap for technology. There's some really obvious low-hanging fruit in terms of document assembly. I think there are ways that technology can help build consistency. It can obviously bring us scale, but importantly can also help solve problems of bias. I think in the medical context that Nicole brought up, for example, there have been studies that show checklists are a really effective tool to help reduce bias in pain management, where there were big racial and gender disparities in who was offered pain medication, for example. That using checklists as standardizing those processes really helps solve. Technology is a piece of it. The process is obviously the important part, but technology can help us implement those new processes. One of the things that I've been kind of tossing around recently is this thought that maybe what we need in legal technology is not the next Uber, and something that I thought for a while was like, yeah, no one has come up with that big, startling problem to solve like Uber did and changed the driving. Maybe what we really need is the next spreadsheet, which is what transformed accounting, and now is the most utterly boring tool, but yet no accountant could do without it. So I'm really interested in seeing how we can get there.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Frank. I am A to J Authors project manager. As much as access to justice has been knocked into a phrase, we're access to justice author. We are a document assembly interface and now a document assembly tool for helping people who do not have a lawyer, for pro se litigants, self-represented litigants, to fill out their court forms. Initially, A to J Author was just a project that was funded by the Legal Services Corporation. They set out a special chunk of money out of their appropriation from Congress for technology-related improvements to legal aid. And so most of our authors, our users, are legal aid organizations across the country. We also have been used by courts, and most recently, we are working with law students who are digital natives who have the ability to understand technology and get it really quickly in a classroom setting to partner with a legal aid organization to help them automate forms that they don't have the time to complete. So we have the law students with the tech savvy, and we have the legal aids who have the heuristics, the subject matter expertise, and we partner them together. I've been with A to J Author for about 6 years now. I also am a lawyer, but I only practiced for about 1 year and did contract review, and it was awful. And so I now am a project manager, and so this, for the law students out there, that you're here is really great, because I think law and technology is a really emerging area that if you are the least bit or even a little bit tech savvy, you can partner that with your legal understanding to be project managers who can talk to the programmers but also understand the legal side of it. So I think that's a really interesting intersection with law and technology for law students to actually get jobs, which is, I'm sure, what you're all worried about.
Thank you. So starting with a couple of questions for the panel and giving some of the audience members that are new to legal technology an overview of what we're actually talking about and what we're actually achieve with this topic. I'm gonna throw you a softball. Can technology bridge the gap to access to justice? And if so, how? I know that all of you have all spoken about different apps and different projects that you've taken on to bridge that gap, or is that the right path that we should be taking? Should we be taking a different path? I'll start with you, Robert.
Yeah, so our motto of our organization is no data, no change. And what that means is that if there's no access to the data, we don't know what's going on, so we don't really know what change to make. And that change, again, because we're nonpartisan, is up to the local constituency, right? Like, we report what these rates are, but it's up to the people in these counties to decide, what they want. Is the ROR rate too high? Is it too low? But without access to the data, we're kind of operating in the dark, right? We don't know whether any particular policy intervention is good or bad or what we need to do. So one way to use technology to increase access to justice is to make that data available to the public, so that way, or at least to researchers, so that way, the proper interventions can be taken.
Thank you.
So actually, the data issue is interesting. My answer is no, technology can't close the access to justice gap. When we look at the best data we have comes out of the Legal Services Corporation. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar, it's a federally funded organization that provides grants to legal aid organizations around the country. But they also have been putting out a report every year on the state of access to justice in the US. That's the best data that we have, and it's not great data because it is only focused on low-income citizens, because that's their charge, is to provide legal aid to low income. So it doesn't really cover moderate means individuals who also have a hard time getting meaningful legal help. But the latest data showed that 86% of the civil legal issues that happened in 2016 did not receive any meaningful legal help. And so what does that mean? I think under the LSC's definition, it's sort of access to a human lawyer, but as we all know, that you can get meaningful legal help without access to a human lawyer. But of that data, of those people, only 9% indicated that if they didn't go to a lawyer, they went and looked online. Only 9%. And again, I think it's somewhat misleading because it's only dealing with low-income populations. I think if we look at modest means too, I think that number would go up substantially. But so people aren't turning to technology as their first option for handling a legal issue. I think most people think that the reason that we have an access to justice problem is because lawyers are expensive. That is absolutely not the reason for our crisis. Our crisis has to do more with the fact that people don't want to deal with a legal problem. They don't know that what the problem they're having is a legal issue. So I got kicked out of my apartment. I don't know, that sucks, but I don't think I have any legal remedy. And people just don't want to deal with lawyers. We have a massive PR problem as lawyers, and I think that if you look at some of the studies that are out there about, most people in the low-income brackets, most of their exposure to the law is in the criminal sphere, dealing with police, dealing with other forms of law enforcement. And those are experiences that lead to shame and resentment, and those experiences are carried over into the civil realm. So if somebody has a civil legal issue, they're less likely to do anything about it if they've had a bad experience in the criminal realm. So all of that's to say, technology is a piece of the puzzle, but there's a lot of other pieces to the puzzle. I think the obvious benefit that technology has is scale, right? I mean, we can take all the low-level stuff that lawyers do, anything that can be automated, drafting forms, basic advice, basic access to legal knowledge. We can take that, we can put it in an application, and we can scale it out. As many people as want can come look at it. That's amazing. And that one lawyer, one legal aid organization cannot accomplish that on their own. But we have massive systemic problems. The court system alone is a gigantic mess. And I think that we're not going to get there unless we look at sort of a holistic approach. Obviously, my company builds tech. I believe very strongly in the ability of tech to help, but it can't be a solution on its own.
I would definitely agree with what Nicole said. I mean, I think we're solving these problems, we're solving a process, and technology is the tool that we can use to achieve a result. It's just one tool. I think one of the really obvious ways that we could solve this problem is not by looking just at simply pro se individuals who are trying to solve a problem completely on their own, but think about where they go for help. They may not recognize that they have a legal problem, but they go to social service agencies like Rosie's Place. That's why we have that partnership with the shelter at Greater Boston Legal Services. We work with other social service agencies that provide funding for people who are in rental crisis specifically. By meeting people there and providing tools that can help the lay advocates there who are maybe very familiar with the problem, to empower them, to help them know that they're making the right choices when they're filling out a paper form that's already there, but maybe the technology can help us guide them through that process of doing that correctly. We can meet people where they already are, where they're not afraid to go for that kind of help. Another thing to think about is maybe some lower key technologies as well. Vermont's a pretty rural state, but we still have this problem in a city like Boston where people at Rosie's Place maybe can't go 5 miles downtown because they don't have the money to pay for the T-Pass. So having telepresence at courts, for example, that's a very low-tech solution. It is a technology solution, and it allows more people to participate meaningfully in the justice system. On the other side of that, the fact that we now have the ability to call up a simultaneous translation service and get that access instantly in dozens or hundreds of languages is a huge sea change. We need more courts to start implementing language access policies that really allow that to be available for everybody, but now it's a possibility, whereas before you might have to wait hours or just reschedule a hearing when you're maybe seeking a protection order as a domestic violence victim. Now it's possible to get that help right away, even if you have those language barriers or access barriers.
So I don't think technology is the 100% solution to the access to justice gap, but I think it's a supplement. So along the same lines that Nicole was talking about with the LSC studies, they've shown that for every person that shows up that shows up to legal aid, half of them are turned away because there aren't enough attorneys in legal aid. And given that every year LSC has to hard lobby Congress to not get legal aid in the United States defunded, I don't think we're going to see a huge jump in that there's going to be a lawyer for every person. And so I think technology can help people at least get legal information, at least help them fill out the court documents. We do need justice system reform in that the court documents and the court process is confusing. It was written for lawyers, by lawyers, and so we spend a lot of money to learn those fancy words and those fancy processes when we're in law school, but not everybody out there has that advantage. And I also think we need to meet people where they are. So I'm not a plumber or an electrician, but you better believe I go to YouTube before I call the plumber and the electrician to try and fix something in my house. So we have this DIY culture, the do-it-yourself idea that you can find it on YouTube, you can find it online, and so it's not just the very poorest of poor in the worst situation of their life. It can be that middle income that need just a little bit of help to help them figure out that they don't need the plumber, they just need to, shake the toilet handle, or you don't need the electrician, you can just tighten the thing on your light switch. And so I think we do need to, that technology can kind of be that bridge, but not the whole solution.
Thank you. Just piggybacking on that last comment about using technology on the bridge, as a bridge, and noticing that we have this DIY culture and how to implement that in our communities. The question I have is specifically gearing to those underserved communities that don't have access to even know what a DIY is, right? Like some people don't have internet in their homes or in their communities, so they can't go on Google and YouTube to see what that looks like. And the only access they have is to go into an office and see how they can get the services that they need best. So one of the biggest barriers when introducing technology in justice is introducing technology just at the most basic level. And how does those resources, how do you explain the resources or lack thereof in the works that you all do, starting at phase one for most people? And I'll start with you since you've.
So there was a Pew study a couple of years ago that found that 60% of low-income people actually do have access to the internet via their smartphone. So as the technology slows down, as Dan Lear was showing us in the graph, the people having smartphones and having access to Wi-Fi in a coffee shop, or as I was driving here from my hotel, the way station, or like the what are they called? The where you pull off rest area.
Rest stop?
So the rest stop, on the sign, it said Wi-Fi. So it's free Wi-Fi at a rest stop on the side of the road. So it's not everybody. Like I said, technology is not going to be for everyone. But if 60% of the people have at least a smartphone or can access a library, that's why libraries are important, a courthouse, so that it's not for everyone, but it lets us move forward a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Does anyone else on the panel have any remarks towards that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to echo that study. I'm sure the figures, I think that number was from 2015, the 60% number, so I think it's much better now. But we also have to recognize that some of the people who are in that group may never be able to use the technology on their own, because the process is something they can't manage on their own, whether they have the technology or not. Those people might still need a legal aid lawyer, which I think is why the assistive technologies that can help the lawyers do their work faster, that can empower lay advocates to help the clients navigate the technology tool, but do it successfully and know that they're doing it correctly, are really important.
Yeah, I have two comments on this. One is that a lot of times we do go lower tech to reach those folks. If you're worried about your data plan, or if you don't have access, a lot of these products that we're building, we're also building with SMS capabilities. So you can text, you can have a conversation, or interact with whatever the application is via text, and never have to go onto a website. The other thing too is really careful thought about the interface that you're using. And a lot of people, we get a lot of calls saying like, we want to build an app. We want you to be able to find it in the app store and download it to your phone. Nobody downloads apps to their phones anymore to begin with, so that's usually not the right move. But the thing I'll say is that there are other interfaces that can be considered besides creating your own app. Things like using Facebook. There's a lot of opportunity to use Facebook's APIs to create things that will appear, and maybe Facebook's a dirty word this week. But you get to the user where they are. If most of your users are on Facebook, then you can create a product that is interfacing with them there, that they can interact with without having to go to another site. And so, I think there's even folks that have a hard time with, and this is based on our user testing, so going out and being on the field and testing with people who have these limited opportunities to get on the internet, they're still on Facebook. Like, they're finding a place at work to get on it. They're going to the library. They're going somewhere. They're getting on Facebook. So I think it's a lot about considering how you're building the product and who you're building it for. You can reach more people, but yeah, there's always going to be people that are left off.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, we work more at the aggregate level, and, our data is more useful for analyzing policies than intervening in specific cases. But something that's interestingly related is that, there are places like in Florida where until now, or until recently, they weren't recording, say, the ethnicity of the defendant. Or in Washington, they don't record anywhere whether the defendant is indigent. And so if we don't have that information, we can't determine whether they're being treated properly, whether their outcomes are different based on, how much money you make or what color your skin is. And so recently, and by recently I mean like last week, Florida just passed a new bill that's going to make them the most transparent state in the country in terms of their criminal justice data. They're going to have all of their data sent to a single government agency following a standard format with a standard set of variables. And from now on, they're going to include the defendant's ethnicity. So, those are the kinds of things that will help in the long run in terms of policy change. And then, if we want to talk about low tech And in our realm, the people that we really worry about that are low tech are actually the courts themselves. I know that, you guys are mostly lawyers and work with law firms, and, Dan was saying earlier, oh, we got this information from the lawyers in Excel. Oh, we would love to get something in Excel, right? Like the courts, we get information. We've gotten, handwritten. We got steno pads. Anything you can imagine. Because if you're trying to look at the justice system one county at a time across the entire country, showing here, there are over 3,000 counties in the United States, right? And these cases are decided at the county level. They're not decided, at the state or federal. So if we only focus on state or federal, we're only getting like this tiny slice, right? So, it's very important. And so the people who, have these technology problems are mostly the courts themselves that lack either, a standardized system or training in order to be able to, make this data available to the public or at least to researchers.
That's powerful. I think it follows up, well, the question I want to follow up with that is, in pretty much the consensus here on the panel is that legal tech is a tool, but not the answer, not the solution for access to justice. So people that want to use this as a tool, especially Measures for Justice, especially Measures for Justice, how can people go about using these tools in a greater scheme, for instance, in Facebook, these hackathons that people are using to change their communities? If they're going to use these things like Measures for Justice and getting this information that these things are happening and that these things are being ruled in this way, what's the next step for them? What advice can you give community leaders that are here in the audience that can use your tools to get access to justice in that capacity?
Yeah, so I think the two things I would say are, number one, making, like I've said a few times already, making the data available so that way we can actually present this data. For example, I would love to be corrected if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that Vermont doesn't have a statewide court management system, a case management system for their courts. So we can't.
Oh, for the courts, you're saying?
Yeah, for the courts. So if I want to, know how many cases were processed in this county and how many were found guilty and how many were, indigent, like all that information, we would have to go to each courthouse and get the approval of each and data from each of them. And again, each of them are going to have a different format, then we get the steno pads, et cetera. So, and then there are some states, like the ones we have up here, that have statewide databases, so it's easy for us to get them as kind of the low-hanging fruit for our first few states that we get, right? But in terms of the, the hackathon mentality and what to do once you have the data, once the access isn't an issue, then, we have this wealth of information that's in here. And, me and many of the people at Measures for Justice are more focused on gathering the data and presenting it to the public. And again, because we're nonpartisan, we don't make a policy recommendation like this is what you should do. So the next step is to use that hackathon approach to go over all this data and figure out what should we be doing to affect the change that we want. Yeah.
Does anyone in the audience want to contribute?
I think hackathons can be like a pretty good way to come up with some ideas. And actually at a hackathon, we built this tool for Write Clearly that connected to Google Docs. And that's a good example of gluing two pieces together. That's a perfect project, I think, for a hackathon. But obviously the rubber has to meet the road at some point. And that's where the challenge is. A lot of hackathon ideas kind of die on the vine because there's not some underlying support to make it happen the rest of the way.
In terms of like the community support, if you're a community leader out there, I would think about partnerships, kind of like Quentin was talking about how Boston Legal Services is in a shelter. And so you meet people where you are. So if you have a social service organization or a church group or daycare, whatever, like where people might not know they have a legal problem, you can help bridge that gap to the legal services and the information and the tools that the legal services organizations might have. So there's a thing called medical legal partnerships where doctors partner with, like a medical school will partner with a law school, and they'll have the doctors have kind of a checklist, like, oh, you said you have asthma. Like, do you live in an apartment building that maybe is older than X, that it might be asbestos or mold or something causing the asthma? So then there's the legal solution to fix the medical problem of an unsafe environment causing a medical issue, they can fix the unsafe environment and solve the medical issue. So reach out to the legal aid organizations and the legal services providers if you're in the community, and you can kind of share resources and figure out how you fit together best.
Thank you. So, moving past that, reaching out, community building, and trying to find solutions for these issues, and using legal tech as one of those tools. A question that we were submitted was, what are the barriers to implementing the technical solutions to our access to justice? Meaning, when we have everything that we have, and we have the people that are willing to do the work, we have the data that's been given to us by a nonpartisan organization, and we are trying to bridge this gap between lay people that don't understand what's going on with the law, and lawyers that understand what's going on with the law, but isn't really connecting with the community members that have all this data. Like, we have an issue. We don't know what the legal issue is, but we have the data. There's an issue. There's a consistency that we're showing. What are the barriers into implementing these technical solutions? We already discussed a little bit about, 60% of people, if not higher, have access to their phones, but there has to be more than that, right? Because if we continue to see these issues perpetuate, if we continue to see legal tech as a way of solving this issue, what do you guys what have you guys experienced in your field that have been some of those barriers? And get into that part.
I can answer that one. The biggest barrier is funding, hands down. So there's a lot of interest right now in building tech for good, for justice, but there's a lot of really bad tech that's being developed because they're all underfunded. So there's all these projects happening across the country, and they're all trying to build applications with, a $20,000 budget. And building successful technology is very, very hard and very, very expensive. And I think that, we have the technology right now that makes it easy to do, but that doesn't mean it's going to be successful. So I think if we want to build technology the right way, we need to have these projects be well funded. I think there also is a patchwork of technology being built around the country, and everybody's building these small projects, but if we all consolidated efforts and spent $1 million on one big project that everybody can leverage, that's a much better game plan. And we're just not doing that right now. And I think the biggest issue with a lot of what's happening and what we're building is that nobody's learning about it. And nobody's learning about it because we have this tiny budget, we build this tech, and then we don't have anything left over to market. And marketing is the most important thing about building a product. People need to know about it. So if you spend all of this energy and effort and build this product, even if it's a great product and nobody hears about it, then you haven't succeeded and it hasn't made an impact on anybody. So I think we need more money to market these, to get them out there, to find new creative ways to reach the people that we've had a hard time reaching. And I think that will go a long way toward us being more successful. And then the last thing, I have many opinions on this fact, the last thing I'll say is that we don't have good data on impact of this technology. There's no good data. So we're turning our wheels. The LSC funds about $4 million a year, between $4 and $5 million a year for legal aid to build their own tech. We don't know how helpful that's being. So that's a problem.
I would really echo everything that Nicole said. I think one thing I would add is that lawyers ourselves, we are getting in the way as well in the success of these projects. Wearing my IT hat, I can speak with experience that there are a number of attorneys who just have a challenge thinking, yeah, it is worth it for me to learn this new technology that's going to help me do my job faster. But wait a second, I don't have time to learn how to do it, even though it's going to save time in the long run. People have to be willing to adopt that mindset, to not be naysayers, to not take the negative approach that maybe lawyers we have built into us through law school, which is to be cautious, to look out for all the possible pitfalls. But sometimes it's worth taking those risks in order to move things forward and to get more people help.
I also see the problem not just with initial funding, so they have the $20,000, they build a really cool tool, and then there's no money after that. So how do you sustain it? And so that's what we're seeing a lot with A to J Author, that there were a lot of projects in 2009, 2010. People got interviews. The law changed. Those forms need to be updated. And so you have to think long term. It's not just the new shiny thing that the hackathon can slap together in 2 days that looks really cool and demos really well. But what is the long-term sustainability for these tech projects? So tech is not going away. And so if you build something, you should think about what platform is it going to live on? Who's going to pay the server costs for the Amazon web server? Who's going to update it when the law changes? Because the law is going to change. Things like that, long term.
Great. We're doing a time check because I want to get you guys to your lab on time. Hitting the 15-minute mark, so I think it's a great spot to break and see if anyone in the audience have any questions. I see Professor Sand.
We do have quite a few. I saw some hands go up during the.
Ooh.
Hi, as a career prosecutor turned law professor, a longtime concern about geographic injustice, I want to thank all of you for helping with that and helping with access to justice. We tend to equate access to justice with access to court. And yet, once people get to court, they're still subject to the biases and prejudices of judges and juries. So my question, perhaps a bit futuristic, do you see a role for technology in the decision-making and adjudicatory process?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So we have a couple of measures. So our goal, right now we have court data, but our goal is to measure the criminal justice system from arrest to post-conviction. So even before they get to court. For example, here's one where we're looking at whether the case is referred, or what about the case is referred to the prosecution. And then we can look beyond that, what percentage of those are dismissed. And so, you know, as time goes on and we're able to work on our data collection some more, we really want to be able to fill in more measurement of deflections outside of the system and interactions of law enforcement and jails and you know, what happens to people before they get to court.
I think there's a lot of opportunity for technology to help people participate in the court system. I mean, a staggering amount of people, just if they're facing an eviction, they don't even show up to court because they think there's nothing good that can come of it. But your specific question about helping with decision-making, I see right now is the trickiest area that we have in legal technology. I don't know how many of you guys have seen the reports about these risk assessment, machine learning risk assessment tools that have been shown to, well, in part, we can't even look at some of these algorithms. So they're influencing court decisions about things like probation, but we can't even look at the algorithms. We don't even know what biases might be baked into this. So there's a lot of potential tricky stuff, and I think that's the stuff where we really need to tread carefully because these are people's lives, and we don't have a perfect system right now. We rely on humans to make judgments, and they have their own biases. And I don't think we're at a point yet, and David Colarosa is the guy I talked to about some of this stuff, but we're not at a point yet where I think we can say that, that a machine will do better at removing bias.
Well, yeah, I think to that point, like it's really important to recognize that algorithms implement something that somebody created. And if we're looking at machine learning algorithms, they might be just analyzing what's happened for the last 40 years. We don't want to have the next 40 years look like the last 40 years in terms of who is being incarcerated for different amounts of time. So it's not enough to just look at machines to solve the problem, but I think that taking some of the subjectivity out of the process, making it more independent is right as long as we choose to put up the work up front to make the algorithms correct.
And have them be transparent.
Yes, absolutely.
They covered it.
Okay, great. Next question.
That actually leads into my question. My name is Ryan Munn. I run a co-work space in White River Junction. And a lot of the work I do is around helping open source projects find ways to monetize or get funded. And one of the projects has enlightened me to an extent that there's some industries that have made huge progress because they're open source and have engaged in that crowdsourcing and collaborative effort to produce technologies around their industry, whereas other industries are way behind in that. I would guess legal is one of them, given what you've described in the courts. So two sides. One is, can some of you talk a little bit about, and I'm guessing a little bit of the IT lawyer hat helps in this, in the challenge and how you're approaching the challenge of getting the sort of the layperson assistance to bridge that technology gap, both in the consumers and the people that need the help, and also in the court systems and in the old attorneys' offices to get them engaged. And also I'm hoping there might be some information about open source projects out there to get more of a global collaborative approach to these solutions. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big evangelist for one open source project right now, which I've been making great use of, a project that Rena, who's there in the back, has been working on with me, which is going to be a guided interview for eviction defense. We're just starting to use it right now in some limited tests at Rosie's Place, for example, where I can be there to help people with that work. And it's called Doc Assemble, I should say the name of the product. Actually, I'll be going a little bit more into it in the lab that I'm doing in the afternoon, going over how to use that tool. Definitely believe in open source. I think that's if you look at the most dominant operating system in the world, Linux is an open source project, and I think we should be emulating that, sharing ideas, maybe not literally open source licenses, but just that philosophy of sharing ideas is going to really accelerate legal tech.
No, go ahead. So on the A to J author front, which is also like DocAssemble, we're not open source, but because we're funded by the Legal Services Corporation with government money, we have a completely free license for anyone who is a law student, a law school, a nonprofit, a court. We're even open to talking to pro bono attorneys to do it, to use our software. And so we're not quite at open source yet, in case my bosses happen to watch on the live stream. Wink, we're working towards it. But because a lot of these, the Legal Services Corporation, this TIG, Technology Innovation Grants, are funded by Congress, a lot of their projects are on GitHub, they're open source. We come together in sort of legal aid technology communities and share that. So I think it also is very important to share anything that is government funded with the people.
Except you should know the legal aid community has a tragic love of Drupal. So they all there's this Drupal open source community. Lord, like the first guy who was like, we're gonna do Drupal in legal aid. In legal aid, there's a big Drupal open source community. But outside of that, there's really not much.
So I'm a researcher and not so much a tech person. So, I can't speak to it too much, but what we do at Measures for Justice is to put all this information up for everyone to be able to see, to the public. And so, in terms of, what do we do with the courts? Like I said, we've gone door to door on these county courthouses. We've tried things like sending our people to go to the courthouse, because sometimes they'll have the data, but they don't have, like you were saying earlier, they don't have the funding. We don't have anyone who has time that we can dedicate to getting you this data, or we don't have anyone who knows how to get you this data. So we've done things like send our tech team to the court to help them. And we're still working on different ways to try and make that more scalable, because doing that for 3,000 counties would be kind of tough.
Can I just interject one too? On the court side, just like we talked about in Nicole's session about people who are on Facebook don't necessarily know what they're giving away when they just use it and don't read the privacy policy. I think that's true of court systems too, as they move from the spreadsheet or the handwritten steno notes, even to like a database. If they're moving into a case management system or a court management system, they sign on with these big technology companies that do this, and they have lots of money at court conferences, and they sponsor excellent receptions.
Technologies.
I did. So the court has to understand what they're signing on to, and just because it's shiny and it looks cool and it fits into their budget this year, they have to know what they're giving away and make sure that the data can be pulled out in a way that's not a steno notepad, that it's in standardized formats and that people can access it, and that other tools can be used to put data in, so it's not their proprietary court filing system. And what are they charging the end users? All of this is the responsibility of the courts, and any of you that are on those kind of projects that are working to modernize courts should be thinking about that too.
And I can assume that when those changes happen, when these courts modernize themselves, the cost of that's going to trickle down to the taxpayer, or the cost of that might be absorbed by the organization and it takes away from other projects that we might find important. So,
well, even worse, it's user fees, which really are disproportionately affecting low-income people. And even if there are waivers for the lowest-income people, you have that barbell effect someone was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Even like one county is $6 million in Illinois to implement one case management system for one county.
Yeah.
So that's all trickling down to an extra $5 per person who files, which when the filing fee is already $187, whatever, builds up.
Yeah, a lot of sides. Mr. Carter.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Brantley Carter, 2L here at Vermont Law School, and thank you all for being here. In regards to closing meeting people where they are and closing the access to justice gap, I just want to know, have any of you all offered in your respective roles with your companies, like informational sessions or community meetings in underserved communities to help people learn when they may have a legal problem? Because I know it's mentioned that a lot of people don't reach out to lawyers because they're not aware that they have a legal problem. And if not, do you think that is something that should be started?
Yeah, we do that all the time at Greater Boston Legal Service. I think most legal aid organizations have that engagement with the community groups. But I can only speak to mine.
I just went to a conference on self-represented litigants in California, and one of the sessions they were talking about a project in Florida in which they, the legal aid organization got a little bit of grant money, but they brought together the social services organizations for that area in Northwest Florida, and they had like a day where they had childcare, so somebody could, you know, come and talk to a lawyer without their 2-year-old pulling on their leg. As a mother of a 3-year-old, I would love like free childcare. They had some organizations for like domestic violence if you had an issue with that. They had the food pantry in if you needed food assistance or if you needed help filling out paperwork for that. So it was the legal aid organization or the communities partnering together and thinking of all the things people could need, and also how free parking, transportations from the church provided the vans. And so it's really building the community to go out there and help people with everything they might need.
Thank you.
I'll ask a question. All of these nifty things you guys have spoken about are really awesome. Are they or will they drive prices down for lawyers, therefore, you know, creating even more access to the legal services? And how far off do you see any significant drop in prices based on these more available services that, you know, people can just access just from having the internet?
Yeah, I think the idea behind creating efficiencies in law firms through technology is that they can then serve a greater population by reducing their prices. There's a lot of discussion about that sort of in the abstract in legal technology. I don't see it actually happening in practice. I think it's kind of like the trickle-down tax plan. Like, let's, you know, we'll give the companies more money, we're gonna assume that they're gonna give it to their employees. But I haven't really seen it actually happen in practice. I think for the last like decade, we've thought theoretically that is what would happen. I just don't see it happening, and I don't know if anybody else has an opinion on that, but there certainly is no data available on this.
Well, yeah, can't really speak to technology as much for that problem, but I know that there's some people doing low bono work who maybe could benefit from this, or maybe would be willing to start a practice that wouldn't be able to without the technology tools. I hope we can encourage new practices that way. And I think a bigger incentive maybe would be fee shifting statutes would probably help in the same area. People who are just starting out, setting out their shingle for civil legal aid particularly, if they could get paid for doing that work by when they win their case, I think that will help more people be willing to enter it. I think that's where we're going to see that change, is from new lawyers entering the space and being willing to start their own practices.
That's a good point. I mean, there are a lot of like new model law firms who have like subscription-based models or fixed fee models, and a lot of those are being fueled by a lot of the efficiencies that technology has created. And so I think we can extrapolate that there's some expanded access there.
Yeah, we hear a lot about, well, you know, if you help people who fill out their own court forms, isn't that taking a job away from a lawyer? And that's not really the target population that we're going for. The people who a lot of times are using these on the statewide websites wouldn't have been able to afford an attorney in the first place. And if they got to legal aid, they were turned away because there's not enough. And so that's not really our target population. So we're not taking jobs away from lawyers. Don't fear us.
Going off of target populations, I'm wondering, because we are a country that has the largest incarcerated population, I volunteer at the women's prison up in Burlington, and they have access to Westlaw, which as a law student I know is already confusing to use. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you've heard of in the legal tech space to help people who are already incarcerated have better access to legal services.
I know there was a pilot project a couple of years ago in Wisconsin in which they provided access to prisoners to A to J guided interviews, one specifically. And it was something that I think the court pulled because they didn't want too many people filing these petitions then. Ooh. So it was before my time, but I've heard through the rumor mill. And so it's kind of an understanding that the internet isn't this big scary place. Well, it is, but that just limiting their access to Westlaw or some old moldy case books in the jail is not really sufficient anymore, that there are statewide legal aid websites in every state, there's valid legal information, and that using a little IT knowledge, you can block the bad websites and still give them more than just Westlaw, which takes 3 years to learn how to use.
I think that this will be the last question, but I do have one.
Two more.
Knowing that there are implicit, oh, sorry, go for it. Please.
Hi, I'm Laura Berger. I'm a master's student here. I'm wondering if you guys have seen any kind of legal tech startups happening in other countries as well.
Yeah, so actually, one of the things I meant to say is that we have I moderate a international A to J tech Slack team. And so there's people from all over the world who are working in this space. If anybody's interested, you can let me know. I can add you to it. But yeah, there's a lot of activity all over the world. And actually, there was just a global legal hackathon that is still ongoing. The finals are in April, but it was fascinating to see there were teams all over the world. A lot of them working on access justice issues. So it's not just happening here. Although if you look at the Rule of Law Index that the World Justice Project puts out, like we fare pretty badly even against third world countries in access to justice. So we had a lot of work.
Yeah, it turns out it's not just an American problem, this like underfunding. And so I work a lot with the Legal Aid of Ontario in Canada. And so Canada used to have better funding than we did in the US. So they're coming to this not enough funding for legal aid problem a little bit later than we are. But we've had inquiries across the world. Australia is a power user of A to J because it's the same idea that they had enough funding, but now there's not. And what can technology do? So we're actually seeing a lot of the innovation that happens in the U.S. being adopted and transformed to fit their needs.
And I guess I'll ask the last one. Knowing that there are implicit biases going into these algorithms that are collecting all of this data, how can you tell us to account for those implicit biases on the outcome when we're interpreting the data?
That's a tricky question. Because sometimes we don't even know, especially machine learning, where we set it up, but then the machine keeps learning on top of itself, and we can't. We don't have a lot of transparency into what's happening there. I think the best way to solve this problem is by having diverse engineers. And I think that's a big problem, that we don't have diversity in tech. So we have a bunch of white guys who are doing creating all these algorithms. And there's going to be natural, even if you're not a jerk, there's going to be natural biases that are baked into that. So I think trying to create some diversity amongst engineers is, I think, of critical importance. But on the other end, I don't know. I don't have any good advice there. Anybody?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to solve that one either.
So,
I just want to say real quick, if you want to learn more about Measures for Justice, or you want to look at the portal, you can go, of course, on your smartphone right now. But if you want to learn how to use it, John and I will have some laptops set up outside, and we'd love to show you how to navigate the portal.
And
talk to you about Measure for Justice.
Thank you. And we're also taking donations from Measure for Justice. Like he said, we need funding to make this stuff happen. And we need to have these tools, especially sponsored by these nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations like Measures for Justice, to keep us empowered to actually help these populations. So please consider that. And I just want to thank our panelists individually. Thank you so much for donating your time. And our last two panelists, Quentin and Jessica, will be doing a lab later on today. Jessica's doing a lab at 2:15. So we're just going to break you guys off a little bit early so you can get some coffee. We have granola bars so you can get some energy pumped up. But let's give our panelists a round of applause, please.